tonight as we talk about the subject of discipline. So our title for tonight is Discipline to Direct the Heart. And this fits in with what we've been talking about from the beginning. If you've not had a chance to download the handouts that are available on Facebook, I encourage you to do so. And you can follow along tonight if you'd like there. So Hunter and Truett shared a room here in the house, and they shared that room for many, many years until about 3 years ago. And so the girls did some sharing of some rooms, and as each one in the family became the oldest one in the house, they got to move to a room where they were by themselves. But Truett and Hunter were the last to share rooms for a long time. True. So,
and tell how far apart y'all are.
I'm 24.
I'm 20. Yeah, 4 years.
4 years apart. So I thought we'd start with maybe a fun memory from when you shared a room together. So Hunter, why don't you start tonight?
Yeah, I always thought ours was, or some of my favorite memories was us at night, because that was like the only time we would really share the room. Because our room was so small, it didn't make sense for both of us to kind of do activities in there.
Yeah.
So ours was, mine was really just telling stories late at night, talking about our day. And when Truett was younger, and I was probably like 10, I would kind of just make up stories to talk about. Like if we were watching Star Wars, I'd make up like other like B stories and all these other things. It was fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. And for me, I would say also at night, we'd either, I'd hit play on a TV show and we'd just listen to it and laugh along. Yeah. Or, a really good memory is we had a stereo system in our room, and Hunter would play songs and ask how fast I could guess the song. And so it got me to learn how to guess songs real quick.
It's great.
All right.
It's a good skill.
That's good. So Hunter and Truett are going to help us tonight as we walk through the subject of discipline. That is an important part of the parenting process. It's something that we do along the way. And it's important to put that in the context, because it's not a standalone subject. It's part of a bigger picture. It's part of a process that we're about as parents in the role of parenting. So let's go back to what we have said is our basis. Let's start with what our goal is. The goal of vertical parenting is to win the heart of our children, to love God, to love us as parents, and to love others. And that has to become the goal in everything that we do, especially when it comes to the process of discipline. And the scripture early on, as God gives his law and commands to his people in the book of Deuteronomy, we find this truth and this principle. And it says in Deuteronomy 6, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. Talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." The parenting process has to include faith, and is driven toward this end of help your children learn to love God. Help your children learn to love and trust you. Help your children learn to love and trust others. This is vertical parenting. This is putting first things first. Now, we might contrast that with what we might call horizontal parenting. This leaves God out of the equation and leaves heart out of the equation. And so the Bible gives us some warnings against what can happen when you turn to just horizontal parenting. Because really what happens there is one of two extremes. You get this extreme where a parent is disengaged and uninvolved, or you get the other extreme where a parent is over-engaged and over-involved. And the Bible warns against both of those, especially in this context of discipline. So Proverbs 13:24 says, "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly." So the person who's at the extreme of, I'm out of the picture, I'm not involved, I'm not engaged in the process of teaching and training and even disciplining, they've gone too far in the opposite direction of what God has intended. The other extreme is for a parent to become so overly controlling that it causes frustration in the child. And the Colossians 3:21 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." So don't be on that extreme either, where you are so overly engaged in controlling and demanding and disciplining that it causes frustration and you actually lose their heart. both of those extremes, over engaged, not engaged, those leave out the heart of the child. They leave out this love-centered, heart-centered approach to parenting. So let's go ahead and put all this into some context tonight and real stories, because the reason we're all sitting together is because we all have real stories. There were times that Heather and I felt like we did a good job. There were times that Heather and I felt like we didn't do a good job at disciplining and parenting in general. So Hunter and Trude are here to help with some of that. So let's talk for just a moment, or y'all tell us a story of when you were disciplined. There's obviously more than one of those. There's many more, but tell us about one of those.
Yeah, so I'll start and you can help me out with this story. So I was probably about 6, or no. I was probably about 8 and you were like 12 or something.
Yeah,
something along those lines. And we were playing a game online, and we found a way that we could make more money in the game if we paid some money over.
And it was like your own like game's digital currency, like
Yeah.
none of like,
Yeah.
money that benefits
Making
you.
money.
Yes.
It wasn't like how
Right.
Bitcoin is.
No,
today.
yeah. But so it was like we paid, I paid $12 and Hunter paid $6, and we didn't consult the parents about this. We just
we
decided.
thought it was like, hey,
Oh.
if we would buy like fast food by ourselves somewhere, like we'd pay a meal,
Yeah.
we could pay this. It's our money.
Yeah. And so we ended up doing that. We got our online currency in the game. We were loving our lives, and eventually Dad came home from work, and I don't know how it came up, but he found out somehow. And
It's because we had to purchase it with one of their cards.
Yeah.
And I think we probably convinced Mom. We were
Yeah.
like, hey,
and we had the money, and we just said,
yeah,
put it in the
we were
basket.
like, I'm literally going to exchange this
Yeah.
$19 for your $19.
Yeah, exactly. So we did, and then eventually Dad came home and was like, "Hey, that is not acceptable. We can't be paying money over online, all that stuff." Which at the time we weren't exactly.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have been doing that.
Yeah.
We weren't exactly in a financial place to do that. But
Because like Dad didn't know too. Like, did we sign up for something
Yeah,
for all of a sudden?
exactly.
And, like,
It's
was
like
it even
yearly.
secure? Did we sign up for like something that's like $20 a month?
exactly,
Yes.
yeah. And
Yes.
so
That was
yeah.
all brand new stuff for
Yeah.
us too.
Yeah, it was like way early on. So that was the first time we had ever, or I at least had ever really gotten grounded from something. And so we weren't able to
Yeah.
get online and play the game anymore. And we ever, like, since that day, I'm hesitant to buy things online because I'm like, well, do I really need this? And
But our character sat there
Yeah.
banking for that like X amount of weeks that we
wow.
didn't
It's true.
play.
It's true.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the first times I remember, like, oh, this is hard discipline. But even though it really wasn't a big deal, but it was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the first time I was grounded from something.
Yeah.
And contrary to what your siblings would know or think, you were disciplined before that at
Yes,
some point. in your
yes,
life. That wasn't the
yes.
first time you've ever been
No,
disciplined.
no.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah, there's a
Others.
running story in the family is that the baby of the family got the least amount of discipline. So,
Looking at you.
yeah. There may be some truth to that, may not. I don't know. So, when it comes to discipline, it's important that we approach even that from God's perspective. What does He have to say? How does He do that in our lives? And sometimes that means undoing some things that we have thought maybe as parents about what discipline is. It means putting away or replacing some past pictures we've had about discipline. So let's talk for just a moment about what discipline is not, and it'll help set the framework for what discipline is and how God applies it to our life. So here's some things that discipline is not. Discipline is not just expressing my anger at my child's disobedience. And boy, that's easy to do. They do something that you did not expect. They do something that cost you money. They do something that breaks something, that hurts someone, and it's easy in that moment to feel the rush of anger. And some of that is right and justified, but what you do with it is important. But lashing out in that anger is not real discipline toward the end of what God would have us discipline our children with. So I'll talk more in just a moment about my own experiences with that. But this is not what a real biblical definition of discipline is. It's not just me lashing out in my anger at my frustration in the moment. Discipline is not what your parents did to you. It may or may not be. Maybe your parents had a great model discipline for you, But just because that's what they did with you does not mean that that is exactly what you're going to use with your children. We'll talk more tonight about what patterns of discipline look like and which way we choose to discipline. But just because your parents did it does not mean that is the way necessarily to do that with your children. Discipline is different than punishment. That's important to understand. Punishment has with it a connotation of you have failed and you are done and your character is broken, basically. There's something wrong with you and I am bringing punishment upon you. Discipline has a different feel to it. Discipline is driven toward a good end. Discipline is driven toward the heart. Discipline is driven toward correcting a behavior, but more importantly, changing a heart. Punishment, however, is different than that. It just lowers the boom, it brings on the consequences, and it brings with it a very strong weight of disapproval. Discipline is not a one-time event. Sometimes parents get into this thinking that this moment has arisen and I need to discipline and I need to correct all the behavior issues with this one moment. I need to discipline out of them this problem. And discipline is a much longer process, part of the parenting process. It's not just a one-time event. Discipline is not always physical. Sometimes we think that discipline is all one format. It's one way. That it is either it's always a timeout corner, or it's always a spanking, or it's always the removal of some kind of privilege. And sometimes discipline doesn't show up in a physical format. Sometimes it takes on other formats, and a wise parent, a creative parent, a sensitive parent knows how to watch for those and make use of the moment and a wide variety of possibilities for discipline. And discipline is not always just about the act of disobedience, just about the act itself. Discipline from God's perspective for us is not just about the action. It's about our heart. It's about Him winning us and changing us inside, not just what we do outwardly. So that has to be true for us as well as parents. It can't be just about the outward action. And then discipline done in the wrong way can actually cause greater disobedience. You can actually set your child on a course to do the very thing you don't want them to do by disciplining wrongly. So, Heather and I, for just a moment, let's talk about maybe some of these in our own lives where we have realized, okay, I need to not do this because this is not effective. And I'll talk about one of those from me, and then Heather can share hers. So for me, I had to unlearn or replace in my life that discipline is not just me acting out of my anger. It's a very natural, spontaneous thing to do. For some reason, for me, that was my go-to. That was the easy thing I just did. And so I had to learn to curb my emotions in the moment, because the heart of the child is far more important than me just lashing out of my anger. And there are plenty of times where I spoke out, acted out in my anger, and what I caused was hurt in the kids and not help in the kids. I wasn't motivating them to want to obey. I was frustrating them to want to obey in the future. So that was a hard lesson for me, and one that took a lot of time to undo. So that was for me. How about for you, Heather? What would you say you had to unlearn?
Well, I think I needed to unlearn. Well, I needed to learn to relax more, and that helps with experience. The more years and more children you have, you do become a little bit more relaxed, but I needed to unlearn of being so demanding. I expected instant obedience, and not that that's a terrible thing, but you want them to want to obey, and not to the forced obeying. And I know that's a delicate balance, but I remember a time when Brianna was a young teen, and back to the computer stuff. That was all new stuff for us, and it was the messaging app had just come on AOL, the old. This when the
Old school.
it was old school. It's when the computer was in the kitchen, and so that was new and exciting for her. She was talking with a friend, and it was getting late, and I remember coming in and just saying, "All right, you need to turn that off," and they hear that too, and you need to do whatever I deemed important at the time, without any consideration of her interests or opinions at the time. So I think just relaxing and unlearning being so demanding.
Okay, yeah. Nice. So it's a learning process, as Heather said, and our goal should be that we do learn. How does God work with us? And now let me work with my children in that way. I don't want to just do what I saw done. I don't want to do just what feels natural. I want to do what is effective, and I want to do what God calls me to do as a parent. Because as we said early on, this whole parenting process, it's not a one-year thing. It's not even an 18-year thing. It's a lifelong thing. And so if you want to have your children enjoy being with you when they're 17 and 27 and 37, then you have to make some choices early on that change even how you discipline. It's not all about the one moment. It's about a much longer process. So let's look at a passage of Scripture tonight that really gives us our direction for parenting, and it's about how God disciplines us. And so if we can understand how He relates to us, it can give us a format for disciplining our children when that time comes. So Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 11 says this, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by Him. For whom the Lord loves, He chastens, and scourges every son whom He receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but He for our profit, that we may be partakers of His holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." It's interesting in just reading these verses, our mind quickly goes to the words chastening and scourging and pain. But there's so much more here in this passage that's in the connecting words, that's in the spirit behind all of them. So I want us to think about that for just a moment as we think about what it means to truly vertical parent discipline. So here's the first truth that's important for us if we're going to parent and discipline from a vertical perspective. The first is this: discipline must always be in the context of affirmation, reward, and encouragement. If you don't, it will cause possibly greater frustration, anger, resentment, and rebellion. Verse 5 there, the very first part of that section said, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord." The chastening of the Lord Himself, the one who is loving, the one who is gracious, the one who has given His life for us, the one who has extended grace to us. You see, it's in the connecting words and in the spirit behind it, not just in the word itself. Here, when there's discipline, It comes from the one who has redeemed you. It comes from the one who has rescued you. It comes from the one who has poured out grace to you. It comes from the one who has seated you in heavenly places and given you all of his inheritance and his riches. If you don't understand that to begin with, then you miss the whole point of discipline. So anytime you discipline, it has to be toward this end of it's within a context of great, great love, great affirmation that causes the child in the end to want to obey. You're not trying to just scold them, just discipline. You're trying to change their heart to want to obey. That's the purpose of discipline. Now that's unique for every child. And that's true for Hunter and Truett. They both have different personalities, different love language. What would you say for each of y'all was what is it that caused you to want to obey? Now, there's discipline that happens, but there's also what happens behind the scenes that helps you actually want to obey. What is that for each of you, Hunter?
Mine was always, or is always, more of, if I feel like there's like equal respect given, and to where it's not just like, hey, do this just because I said so. Like if I feel like I'm a part of it and that I know what's going on, then I'm like, that's great. I'll do that, and I'd love to even help out by doing this stuff too. Because like I want to be a part, but if it's more of just like, I'm going to order you to do this and not explain anything, it kind of kills me every time.
Okay. True.
Yeah. So what encourages me to like want to obey more? I'd say, being encouraged alongside, like saying, "Hey, you got this," or it'll be, like, here's the reason why, and kind of explaining more the purpose to it, so that I can have the right mindset in accomplishing that task. But also being encouraged along the way with that.
Yeah, that's good. So discipline has to always be against that backdrop, against that context where there's real acceptance. In verse 6 of the passage, it says, "For whom the Lord loves, he chastens." The ones that know he loves them, those are the ones he chastens. He does it from the context of love. And it says he scourges every son whom he receives, the ones that he accepts. They know his acceptance, and therefore they can receive even his discipline into their lives. What that means, you have to do a lot more of the giving of acceptance so that they know when the discipline comes that this is not rejection, disappointment, or casting you out. And discipline all has that feel to it. When you're being disciplined, there's pain to it. And the automatic emotional response, the go-to default for us is, am I being rejected here? Am I being cast out? Am I seen as a disappointment? Am I a failure? And so that has to be compensated with lavish amounts of acceptance and love and affirmation along the way. And it means making sure that we have communicated to them how deeply we love them before and after the discipline happens, especially within the context of that. That means taking some time, and it means not disciplining in ways that are going to humiliate them. For example, disciplining your children in front of other people is humiliating. That's not the way to do it. It's not the time to snap at your kids and bark at them, or choose a discipline method in front of others. That's the time to pick them up, take them out of the room. That's the time to do it privately, because your goal here, remember, is to win their heart, not just to stop the behavior. And so I have to do that in a context of where they know I love them. They know, they sense my acceptance. They are confident. They don't feel rejected, hurt, or cast out. So that's something Heather and I have tried to adjust over the years as we've learned more. And for each of our kids. With 5 kids, you get a variety of approaches that are necessary. You can't just say, well, for this offense is always going to be this discipline, always going to have this consequence to this problem. For me and my personality, I kind of would like that. It'd be real easy, give me a chart and You know, here's 3 responses and three actions. So, but that's not how life plays out. And God produces children that are far more wonderful than just a grid on a chart. So that means we've had to be intentional about communicating affirmation, and that means they're all different. Again, the 2 guys in the family, but 2 very different personalities, 2 very different love languages. So, Heather, what did you find that Hunter and Truett needed uniquely in this way of affirmation when it came to discipline? This context of I need to correct you. So before we do this and after we do this, I want you to know this. What was that was unique for each of them? Yeah.
Well, I have a similar default of being very similar in how I discipline, just because I thought this is going to work. But I did recognize and realize, and this is just really seems like a lifetime ago, honestly, and it's hard to remember. No. But I know when Hunter was very young, he needed more of the verbal affirmation. He needed to be able to process, and he needed to talk through what the consequences were and why. And he was very verbal and auditory. And so he needed the affirmation after whatever the infraction was, that we were both on the same page. And I remember this one time, and I do not remember what the problem was, the offense was, but he ended up making me laugh. I couldn't even continue on with the discipline. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was like, for whatever it was too, because I don't remember either. But the offense happened, and then we went into a separate room.
Yes.
And we sat, and you were trying to explain it, and either then I just kept more asking, like, but why is it like this? And then finding either then some type of similar thing of like, but it's kind of funny how this is like this.
He liked to get me off track. I think that was what it was.
And it ended up to where it just like I got Mom laughing, and that kind of made me laugh. And then at the end, Mom was kind of like, "We're now laughing, and I came in here to settle this in a sense."
It's true.
So it was it's a great memory though.
But his was more verbal, and for Truett, it is true about the baby of the family. They do get away with a few more things, I think.
It's officially on record.
But
wisdom from parenting.
The few times that I do remember having to discipline him, it just crushed him. He was very sensitive, and he needed to feel the closeness physically, holding and extra hugs and being close afterwards. So that's the difference there.
Yeah, and that's just 2 of our 5. Every child is unique, and every situation requires a different set of affirmation and discipline as well. So the next point is that discipline must be unique to the child. Verse 7 in that passage says, God deals with you as with sons. In other words, as a father, he knows each of his children, and he deals uniquely with each of his children. He knows what each one needs. He knows the heart condition. And so you and I as parents, we have to do the same thing. I have to know my child. I have to know what their attitude is. And really, this is what our goal is in discipline, the attitude, the heart. So I have to be aware, what's the attitude or heart situation going on here? Is there defiance? Is there rebellion? Is there secrecy? Is there stubbornness? Is there resistance? Is there willful disobedience? For Heather and I, those things, those registered higher for us on the discipline scale, if you will, of things that needed greater attention, as if their heart was beginning to drift. Yeah. If we saw we were losing what we really wanted, their heart to love God, love us, and love others, then that is what we took note of and disciplined toward. Discipline has to be unique toward the way of each child's processing. So every child is different, of course, in their age and maturity and personality type and love language and birth order and learning style. And you might think, wow, that's just a whole lot. Yes, exactly. That's why this parenting deal, it takes some work. That's why it requires us seeking God and praying and saying, okay, what does this child need? I don't want to just have this blanket approach that you do this, you get this. No, I have to take it in consideration, his personality versus his personality, his age versus his age, the situation in one versus situation in another. You can't just go this blanket approach. And so I have to think through all of that. For Truett, like Heather said, in his where he was in his age and his personality, talking with him often would bring him to a place of just brokenheartedness. And you could tell, all right, there's not a need to go any further with this because he's already crushed just in talking. So, but every child is different. The goal is heart change. So when you see heart change, then you've affected the discipline that's needed. Right. So you have to take into consideration, again, their attitude, how they process the circumstances. What was the offense and what was the motivation? Did they do something that they didn't realize they were breaking a rule? Did they do something unintentional? Did they do it intentionally? Did they look at you and then willingly and defiantly go against you? That's different. That's something that's worth disciplining and dealing with. And then considering their heart. Where are they in this moment? And what do I need to do to get them one step closer, just one step closer, not all the way to the end goal of loving God, loving us as parents, and loving others, which include their siblings? What do I need to do to get them one step closer to that? That means every situation is going to be unique and different. And that's why if you're a sibling, you can't look at another sibling and say, well, how come they only got a when I got a you can't do that because every situation is different. And we don't do that in our Christian life, or we shouldn't do that in our Christian life. Look over at someone else and say, well, I wonder how come they don't ever have to. Well, God knows, and God deals with us as with sons, plural. He knows each of us. So there was a time when Hunter was almost 4 years old, and we had just moved to Ovilla, and God had blessed us with a brand new van. And we'd never had a brand new vehicle before, and here was this big, how long? How many passengers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8.
It was eight where you could still had room for another 3 in the back.
Yes.
8-passenger van. It was perfect for our family. It's brand new, and we're just in awe of this thing. And it's out in the driveway. And I go to work.
Nice maroon color.
It's beautiful maroon color. I come home and
it's an infomercial.
That's setting
like
up
that. Yeah. I come home and Heather begins to tell me a story about what had happened that day. Hunter and a friend, a neighbor, again, Hunter almost 4, they had picked up some rocks outside, figured out that they made chalk marks on the concrete, so why not make some chalk marks on this van, put some lovely racing stripes on it. So they took these rocks and just began to go down the side of the van and around the back of the van and around the other side of the van and back
in a
around.
somewhat racing stripe motion.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, just to make some stripes all the way around. But it was a rock, and they weren't just chalk marks on the van. They were scratches on the van. So, of course, here we are, a brand new vehicle. We've never had this before. It's a gift given to us, and it was like, oh no! And there's a certain amount of, a lot of emotions are coming into play in this moment. There's some anger welling up within me. I'm like, how could you do that? But we have to take in this moment. This is a 4-year-old and maybe another 4-year-old, 5-year-old friend.
Yeah, I believe he was younger.
Yeah, and so I have to take all of that in, take it all into consideration. I'm having to slow down, breathe through this moment and make past this moment. So, Hunter, what do you remember about that, and what do you remember about the discipline of that moment?
I remember as we were doing it thinking, like, this is a pretty sweet thing. This looks pretty cool. And, like, it never registering as this could possibly get us in trouble at all.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the actual thing of, like, if I ended up asking one of y'all, like, do y'all want to come see this? Or if y'all found out and then did it.
Out there.
Or, but whenever it was found out, it was a thing of, like, all of a sudden realizing how terrible it was, where, like, y'all realized how terrible it was, and then off y'all's reaction, figuring out, wow, this is really terrible.
Yeah.
but not knowing what to do, because you could rub your finger across it and the scratch is still there, unlike chalk. And it was just this thing where, if I remember correctly, they're like, hey, we're not gonna decide right now what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a break. I'm gonna go back inside, and we're gonna figure out what we're gonna talk about this later.
Yeah. So, and that's what happened. Heather and I went inside, talked through it, think through it, calm down, and try to take in all of this situation. Not just scratches on our brand new van, but Hunter's age, Hunter's heart, Hunter's personality, how Hunter's going to perceive this, what Hunter needs in this moment. And that's where discipline is much bigger than the moment. And thankfully, by this point, we were beginning to process some of this and learn how to do this. And so we ended up not giving Hunter any kind of consequences other than a conversation.
Yeah, an education.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about how serious it was, and we talked about, the need to not do that. And there was a part of me, naturally that felt a little weird, like, no, something should come from this. Somebody needs to pay for this kind of thing. But we didn't. And we could tell through the conversation that Hunter, as much as he could as a 4-year-old, almost 4-year-old, understood, and that was enough. And Hunter never did that again. Yeah. So we had to match discipline not to necessarily the severity of the action, but the condition of the heart. And that's a very different approach. But this is how God deals with us. He deals with us as with sons. And that means I have to not just match it to the child, but I have to match it to change the heart and not just the behavior. Now, you probably noticed tonight already that I have not talked about discipline formats, whether we're talking about spanking or timeouts or removal of privileges. I'm not going to deal with those tonight because my goal is the heart of the parent. And in reality, there's a variety of forms that God uses with us, and there's a variety of forms that are available for parents. And it is not as much in the form as much as it is in your heart. It's not about the how, it's about the heart. And if you get your heart right in what you're attempting to accomplish, and you learn how to read your child's heart, then it'll totally change your perspective on the hows, on the way you carry it out. It has to be focused on the child's heart. I've mentioned a couple of times Paul David Tripp and some books that he has written. I want to read a quote that he has from one of his books about this idea that we are not just about changing behavior, but changing a heart. He says this. He says, as a parent, you are never, ever dealing with just the words and actions of your children. You are always also dealing with the thing that controls their words and behavior, the heart. Sadly, many Christian parents lose sight of this or don't know this, so they think that their job is to direct and control their children's behavior. So they spend all their parental focus and energy on announcing and enforcing the law. Ooh, it's so easy for Christian parents to get caught up in this, especially. And it puts us off focus when we do, and it causes an effect in our children that's the opposite of what we really want to have accomplished. We end up frustrating them, and they end up disobeying more than obeying. They end up going into secret disobedience instead of opening their heart and truly changing, which is what you want to have happen. So our goal is always to lead them to a place of life. We want them to be grateful, to be kind, to be attentive, to be respectful, to be obedient, to being patient, to being loving, to being reverent. But those things don't happen with just discipline toward actions. Those things happen as heart change happens. And you've got to know, law alone does not change a heart. You can't make enough rules to change someone's heart. In fact, most of the time, when you lay down laws and rules, it only causes people to want to go against them. So that cannot be our only approach to discipline is law giving, announcing rules, and then enforcing rules. We have to avoid that approach because it actually leads to death. It actually causes the opposite. It causes frustration. It causes reaction. It causes rebellion. It causes a child to want to go in the opposite direction. And when your kids get older, it causes them to not even want to be around you. So our goal has to be direct toward the heart and not just the actions. And then discipline has to be for the profit of the child and not just the benefit of the parent. I love in this verse, or this passage in verse 10, where it says, he disciplines for our profit. He disciplines for our good, not just his good, not just so he can feel better, or he got that wrath off his chest kind of thing, but instead he disciplines in gentle, loving, wise, creative ways for our good. So at the end of the day, we are benefited by it and our desire actually comes alive. So this means I have to totally change this whole discipline mindset. I don't discipline in public because that could embarrass. I don't discipline unless I've had some time for my own heart to settle and to be actually broken for my children. I don't discipline until I can love before and afterwards. I don't discipline until I've gotten my anger under control. I don't discipline until I can take time. And I don't discipline until I know I can help affect heart change in the child. So, Truett, you've had not just parents, but you've had teachers along the way and coaches who have made an impact into your life. And you've had some who were so effective that even if they were to correct you and did correct you, it actually created desire in you to want to obey more. So talk about some of those people in your life and the difference that made in how they actually created desire in you to want to obey.
Yeah, so I would say a person who really helped me was Coach Hayes at OCS. And instead of like disciplining me in the sense of like, hey, you're doing wrong, what he did is he showed me how great the success was and building up and showing me ways in order to get success. And so instead of talking about how bad the failure is and what the consequence of not having success is, he talked up how great success is and here's how to get to success. So the consequence, whenever I didn't get it, was the failure. And it was that like, I don't have that success. I don't have what would be the benefit to me. So how do I get there now? And so he would teach me ways in which I could get there. And so I think that's like a true principle everywhere is like teaching how to get to the success rather than just to how to not get to the failure, how to not be how to not encounter consequences.
That's good. That's good. Another point is that discipline must be designed to motivate and not just frustrate. That means I have to think in terms of how can I use this discipline to help them want to obey more the next time, as we're talking about here. So in this verse, also in verse 10, it says that he disciplines so that we might be partakers of his holiness. And that's not just through behavior modification. That's through my heart receiving what he has for me and me desiring him. And God knows how to do that in our lives in a way that it leads us to that point. So as parents, we have to have that same thing in mind that rules alone don't change a heart. They are not what makes someone's heart become grateful and thankful and patient and kind. Paul David Tripp, also in his book about parenting, says, if rules and regulations had the power to change the heart and life of your child, rescuing them from themselves and giving them a heart of submission and faith, then Jesus would have never needed to come. If rules alone could have done it, then the law would have been enough. But that wasn't enough. In fact, the law given to us in the Bible actually stirs up a desire to want to disobey. But that's why Jesus came, to rescue us and redeem us and be our help and our hope in our time of need. And what that does, it actually creates desire in us to want to obey. So, Heather, we've talked some about this whole parenting process in Christian families. And there's a thing that happens where Christian parents want their kids to do right. They want them to be respected. They want them to seek God. But sometimes the process they use to go about that is more rule-based than anything else. And what they end up having is the opposite effect. What do you say to moms who are in the parenting process where they're right in the middle of it right now, and they're struggling with this thing of, I want my kids to do right, but I see what's happening, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to do right them so much that I'm going to lose their heart. So talk about that for just a moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question, and I totally understand right where you're at, and you want what's best, obviously, but in the day to day, you get all bogged down, I think, and I think one thing that you need to keep in mind and remember is that the connection that you are creating needs to be greater than the correction, and you're in it for the long game. That's really what it's for, and I think parenting, it requires humility, and on a day-to-day basis. And going back to the example of Brianna at the computer messaging, and I tell her cut it off and turn it off, and I should go back and apologize for that. I think, I don't know if I did or not. I may have, may not have. It was a long time ago too, but I think just remembering the humility comes with it too.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So to wrap up tonight, the thing that we also have to remember as we discipline is that every time we sit down for a time of correction and discipline with our children, we are speaking volumes about the heart of God. You're saying so much to them, even though you don't mention the name of God. You are painting a picture in their heart and mind of what God is like, and how
that's a scary thing.
It is.
Yeah. It can be.
Mm-hmm. It is, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
It should be a little overwhelming and cause us to say, God, I am desperate for you to help me.
That's right.
Yeah.
I have to have you. So when you take in, this is what we're doing. We are showing our children what the God who created them is like, what the God who came to redeem them is like. Then that puts a new light on this whole discipline process. It helps them see, or it will cause them to see, how does God deal with me when I fail? That's important. Your children can't take in those theological terms and concepts, but they can take it in a very practical way when they fail and you relate to them. Right then, they are forming some conclusions. Oh, this is how authority deals with me when I fail. You're teaching them God concepts. So they're listening. What does my mom and dad think when I fail? What do they think about me? What is this discipline process like? Do I feel cast off? Do I feel rejected? Am I a disappointment? Are they out of control with me? Whatever you're doing is what they are processing and forming in their mind about how God will relate to them. So this is heavy. This is overwhelming. This is big, and it should be. It should drive us to our knees. It should drive us to a place of, God, I am desperate for you. I must have you teach me how to lead my child. So, Hunter, you are now a dad.
Sure.
You've been through the process here at home of being the child. Now you have a child. So tell everybody how old Adeline is, and then talk for just a moment about how does this now affect your view of parenting and discipline?
That's a great question. Adeline is 6 months, or is about to turn 6 months in 2 days. Tomorrow.
Wow.
Sorry, that's how much I haven't been here yet. But it's really just changed my mind on what it's like to be a parent. Obviously, Adeline's not doing anything in like defiance against me or anything like that. Like the most thing that happens is when she gets too excited, she'll just grab my beard and then just like yank down. But it's stuff like that to where all of a sudden I have to catch myself of, because if anyone else were to just get my attention by grabbing my beard and yanking it, I would be ready to fire back with something. And so it's something to where it's even small stuff like that that I like have to remind myself or just think of. She has no idea what she's doing, so therefore it makes no sense for me to get mad at her for this. And it's very, like now saying this is very ironic how it's showing up as in the van story as well. But it's now just like I'm so ready and excited to learn how she operates and works and the way she thinks. That way whenever I discipline her, it's an effective way to where we both are on the same page and we both win. It's very much of like kind of what I was saying, but that's what I'm also trying to learn. It's like, is she going to have discipline the same way I'm kind of wanting to perceive it? Or will it be something more like Brooke and it's having to change, or what will the mixture be?
That's true.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I love that this passage you looked at tonight says that the result of how God disciplines us is that it leads and it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Man, discipline from God is designed to produce peace and cause fruit to happen. And that should change the way we parent. What we do in discipline should lead to greater peace and greater fruit in our child's life. So this is truly discipline that directs the heart, and this is what vertical parenting is all about. So I'm glad we could spend some time together. I'm glad you got to hear from Hunter and Truett in the process. There's a couple of books listed in the notes section there that I think will be helpful to you that are specific about discipline, but from a grace-based perspective that I think will give you some real insight on how to live those things out. And then I'd encourage you to be with us next week, week 6. We're coming up near the end here, only 7 weeks. Week 6, we're going to talk about it's what you do with consistency that will stick. So what are the things that we should do consistently? Because those are the things that will remain in our children's lives all the way throughout their lives. So thank y'all so much for being with us tonight. Thank you, Hunter and Truett and Heather, for our time together. We'll see y'all next week.